Chapter 1: Arrival and Observation. The shuttle's landing gear scraped against the pale, gravelly surface, sending a small plume of dust into the cold, thin air. Outside, the sky was a muted silver, the faint glow of a distant star barely cutting through the haze. I exhaled and felt the chill immediately. The atmosphere was breathable, yes, but carrying a subtle, permanent stiffness, like the planet itself resisted movement. I stepped out, boots sinking slightly into the loose, gray soil, and felt the strange elasticity of gravity, lighter than Earth, yet not so light as to make me float. Every motion required a subtle recalibration, each step an exercise in attention. I took a slow, deliberate survey of my surroundings. Low, rolling hills fading into a distant range of jagged cliffs, scattered clusters of rigid shrubs and wiry vines, all in muted tones of green and brown. Some emitted a faint luminescence, a bioluminescent pulse that flickered irregularly, as though breathing. I crouched beside one of the larger shrubs, inspecting its surface. Tiny motes hovered around it, drifting lazily in the cold air, imperceptibly alive. They moved when I waved my hand, but recoiled not aggressively, rather with indifference. There was no immediate threat here, yet the awareness of observation, of the environment sensing me, was a subtle, insidious pressure. Drawing a small handheld scanner from my pack, I swept it across the plant. The readout flickered, lines of spectral data streaming across the screen. Unexpected compounds, structures analogous to Earth's cellulose, yet with isotopic ratios that suggested native biochemistry had diverged billions of years ago. The thought struck me. I was not in a hostile world. I was in a world that had never accounted for me. That, in itself, was an alien kind of danger. I moved slowly along a narrow ridge, each step a negotiation with the unfamiliar terrain. The wind was thin but insistent, carrying a faint metallic tang, perhaps iron from the dust or from some local mineral. The scanner beeped intermittently, noting trace elements I didn't recognize. Heavy isotopes of magnesium and titanium, irregular concentrations of rare gases in pockets along the ridge. This planet was a system unto itself, coherent and ordered, yet unconcerned with my presence. I found a small depression at the base of a rock formation and sat, pulling out my journal. I began to write, not merely to record, but to calm the incessant, creeping awareness that I was utterly alone here, a single observer on a world that had no protocol for me. The air is thin, but breathable. Gravity demands constant attention. Flora exists in muted, watchful patience. There is life here, but it is indifferent, almost contemplative. If it perceives me at all, it does so as an anomaly, a ripple in its system. I wonder, do I endure, or do I become a ghost in this landscape? I set the scanner to a continuous sweep, letting it hum softly against the wind. I was surrounded by observation, by a network of silent processes I could not yet interpret. The world waited. And in its waiting, I felt the weight of a singular truth. Survival here would not be a matter of fear of attack, but a matter of understanding, adaptation, and constant presence. And for now, all I could do was watch and learn. Chapter 2: Resources and Survival. I moved cautiously down the slope, letting my boots sink into the coarse soil. The landscape stretched in muted tones, and the wind carried a faint metallic tang. My scanner, humming softly, picked up traces of minerals embedded in the rock, magnesium, titanium, and some unknown isotopes. Perhaps these could be useful. Water was scarce, but not absent. I found a narrow trench where condensation had gathered overnight. The liquid shimmered faintly under the weak starlight. I tasted a drop, surprisingly neutral, almost like distilled water. I made a small reservoir using my pack containers. The need for hydration became urgent, and I felt the first real pang of physical vulnerability. I searched for food next. The sparse vegetation offered little. Some plants had thick, fibrous stalks. I ran chemical tests with my portable kit, traces of nutrients, edible but tough to digest. I marked them in my journal. Small insect-like creatures scuttled among the roots, harmless but wary. Observing them gave me a sense of the ecosystem's rhythms, slow, indifferent, yet structured. As night approached, the temperature dropped sharply. I gathered dry plant material, fibrous bark, and loose stones. Using friction and a small spark device, I managed to coax a flame. The fire was small, flickering weakly, but enough to hold back the cold and offer a fragile sense of security. I sat close to it, scanning the horizon with the soft glow illuminating the ridge, pondering the silence of this world. This planet does not hunt me. It does not fear me. It exists beyond concern for my presence. To survive, I must understand its patterns, respect its rhythms, and remember. Every action has weight here, however small. Chapter 3, First Night. The sun sank behind the distant cliffs, leaving the world in a dim, silver-gray half-light. Shadows stretched unnaturally across the low hills, and the temperature began its relentless fall. I felt the cold creeping into my bones despite layers of clothing. Every movement required effort, every breath seemed to carry the sharp sting of the thinning atmosphere. I huddled near the small fire I had coaxed to life, counting each flicker as if it were a heartbeat. The flames danced, casting soft, wavering light across the sparse landscape, illuminating the rigid forms of the shrubs and the irregular contours of the rocky ridge. I checked my supplies again: water, a few fibrous plants, the tiny spark device that could reignite my fire. All of it fragile. Any mistake could turn the night into something fatal. The alien wind whispered through the rocks, carrying fine dust that stung my face. I realized then that this planet itself was testing me, not with aggression, but with indifference. It offered no shelter, no warmth beyond what I could coax from its materials. Survival meant negotiation, calculation, patience. I closed my eyes for a moment and let my thoughts wander. Memories of Earth felt distant, almost unreal: soft green trees, gentle rains, the rhythm of ordinary human life. Here, there was only cold, and observation, and the quiet insistence of survival. Time stretched. Hours passed, yet I measured them in the snap of frost on my boots, in the subtle dimming of my fire, in the shifting of shadows over the landscape. Sleep came in short, cautious bursts, a thin veil over the constant awareness of exposure. Every creak of the rocks, every whisper of wind, reminded me that I was alone, utterly alone, on a planet that did not notice me. By the faint light of distant stars, I made a promise to myself. I would endure. I would learn. I would map this world, understand its rhythms, and use its resources. Only then could survival stop being a fragile hope and become a certainty. Chapter 4: Shelter and Adaptation. The first light of the distant star revealed a world of subtle contrasts. The ridges shimmered faintly, and the low shrubs caught the glow like tiny lanterns. I realized that the night had been a harsh teacher. Cold and vulnerability had forced me to confront limits I hadn't felt since childhood. I gathered more fibrous plants and stones, arranging them against a shallow rock overhang. It wasn't much, but it would shield me from the worst of the wind. I used loose soil to fill the gaps, compacting it with my boots. Every action felt like a negotiation with the planet, testing angles, density, the elasticity of materials under pressure. Survival was no longer about simple endurance, it required adaptation and strategy. Water was my constant concern. The trench I had found yesterday had almost dried. I marked other low points, small depressions where condensation lingered. Observing the subtle flow of air and moisture taught me patterns, invisible yet predictable. This planet was a system, indifferent but coherent, and understanding its logic became my new focus. I experimented with small tools, scraping bark for tinder, testing the caloric yield of fibrous plants, noting their digestibility and nutritional value. Each detail mattered, each small success gave a fragile sense of control over a world that otherwise ignored me. As night approached again, the wind picked up, carrying ice-thin particles that stung the skin. I huddled in my makeshift shelter, feeling the rough texture of soil and stone against my back. Despite the harshness, there was a rhythm here, the subtle movement of plants, the whisper of wind across ridges, the slow shift of light. I began to feel a tenuous connection, not comfort, but recognition of the planet's rules. I closed my eyes and thought, I am alone. But I am not helpless. Each small adaptation, the fire, the shelter, the measured use of water and food, becomes a statement. I exist here, and I can endure. The planet may not notice, but I do. And that might be enough.